competitiveness means that your death is my salvation. That is where the tragedy stems from.
You probably recognize that voice. But before we get into it, I'm Chiara Casati from Counterbalance, and you're listening to
EU Watchdog Radio.
Europe is at a turning point. As the far right gains ground and deregulation spreads, public finance is under pressure. The EU's push for competitiveness is deepening inequalities, favoring corporations over communities and workers, and undermining public services. At the same time, public banks like the EIB hold enormous power, but instead of funding a just transition, they are backing polluters, tech giants, and now even military spendings. So what does this mean for democracy, and how do we take back control of public finance? In this episode, my colleague Alexandra Gerasimcikova speaks with Yanis Varoufakis, economist, former Greek finance minister, and political firebrand. They break down what's wrong with Europe's financial system and explore bold alternatives for a fairer economy. Let's get into it.
In 2019, you made a proposal for a Green New Deal with the DiEM25 movement, which was a much-needed green and social investments plan that was built a lot around public investment needs. In the end, we got the underfunded, private sector-oriented European Green Deal from the EU, and now even this seems to be really pushed aside in favor of investments for competitiveness and the clean industrial policy. This track for us seems a lot away from the public interest and putting more and more corporate profits higher on the agenda. So how do you assess this current, clean industrial competitiveness trajectory in terms of meeting societal, environmental, economic goals?
Europe is in a process of secular decline. I very much fear that the failure of our European Union to create essentially an investment pillar by which to counterbalance the monetary pillar of the European Central Bank. This is a long-term failure. It starts with Maastricht in 1992. And it was one that was not corrected when we had two major opportunities to do that. One was the euro crisis and the other was the pandemic. The result of this failure now is that I believe that we have missed the train. The train has set off without us. We've missed on an industrial revolution when it comes to green energy, when it comes to what I call cloud capital, when it comes to the green transition more generally. You mentioned the killer word, which has done so much damage to Europe, competitiveness. And it is important to juxtapose that evil word, which is extremely damaging, with another word, productivity or innovation. You see, I'm saying something that we shouldn't have to say in 2025, should be self-evident, but unfortunately in Europe it is not, because the self-evident is impossible in Europe, it seems. Competitiveness is a zero-sum game. So, when German industry becomes competitive vis-a-vis Italian industry or, French industry, it means that it can undercut the Italian and French firms. This can be easily accomplished, as it was in the 2000s under Gerhard Schröder, simply by cutting the wages of German workers. So you steal the market share from the rest of Europe. But this starts a race to the bottom. And then in the end, all you end up with is diminutions in aggregate demand, which kill investment. And then you have the complete catastrophe in terms of innovation, which simply migrates to China or the United States, or in terms of productivity. Because productivity is not a zero-sum game. I can be more productive and you can be more productive at the same time. But competitiveness means that your death is my salvation. And therefore, the failures of the European Union, in particular the Eurozone, to enact a proper investment program that would enhance productivity all around and give rise to innovation that leads to more investment and therefore to the conversion of startups into successful companies in Europe. This is the process by which this secular stagnation that Europe has embarked upon inexorably and irretrievably now, and irreversibly. That is where the tragedy stems from.
Thank you. And you recently had a project syndicate piece where you reacted to the Draghi report, which proposes 5% of GDP as common debt to finance this clean industrial policy. It's something that you also included in your Green Deal proposal. But now in the PS piece, you say that it's too late to have this type of financing agenda. Why is it too late?
You can see why. Draghi's report has been condemned and has been utterly nullified by faint praise. Nobody's prepared to pick it up. There's been stunned silence, lamentable silence following it. But allow me to say that Mario Draghi only has himself to blame, because he waited until he was no longer President of the European Central Bank, the Prime Minister of Italy, to come up with a proposal. Some of us have been making this proposal not because we're smart, but because it is self-evident. The first time I presented to the European Parliament a proposal for a Green New Deal was in 2002. And the idea there was that the same way that the European Central Bank is the pillar of monetary stability, or is meant to be the pillar of monetary stability in the Eurozone, the European Investment Bank, in association with the European Central Bank, should become the investment pillar. And when I mean investment pillar, I'm not talking about investments that the EIB already is undertaking, but macroeconomically significant ones. And I remember in 2002, in the European Parliament, in a talk that I gave to the Progressive Caucus back then, which was the Social Democrats, the Greens, the Left, and so on, that unless it's 5% of GDP of the Eurozone area, it is macroeconomically irrelevant. So that was 2002. In 2015, I remember tabling exactly the same proposal about the need, the top priority of having a 5% of GDP in investments brought about by a collaboration between the ECB and the EIB. I put this proposal at a meeting of ECOFIN, the Council of Finance Ministers of the European Union, not just the Eurogroup. And I remember that Mario Draghi was one of the characters there who knocked it down when he was in a position of power, when he was the president of the European Central Bank. The European Investment Bank, to its credit, under Bernard Hoyer, was very positive about this. But the European Investment Bank is irrelevant politically, whereas the European Central Bank is not irrelevant politically inside the confines of ECOFIN. So the proposal that in 2015 was knocked down by Mario Draghi has now been retrieved by Mario Draghi almost a decade later, when it's too late. And it is a fundamental and profound reason why it is too late. Is because when you are in crisis, is there any possibility that you will create a political will for such an important, not radical, but an important transformation? So in 2012, 2011, 2015, when I was in ECOFIN, there was a crisis there, and it would have been the right moment to do it. The pandemic was another opportunity. Instead, what they did was they introduced the so-called Recovery Fund, Next Generation EU, which is it's a tombstone of any chance of a proper investment plan. Some people thought in their infinite optimism that the Recovery Fund would be the beginning of some kind of fiscal union, a Hamiltonian moment. I came out immediately and said, no, it is the end of any such prospect, because essentially it is corrupt. It is a one-off. It can never be anything other than one-off. They sat around the table and they said, okay, we're going to take 700 billion or whatever, and we're going to give so many to Italy, so many to Greece. This is not a pan-European investment plan. This is a mafia-like divvying up of monies that they won't even be able to repay in the next 10 years or so, given the state of the EU's common budget.
Yeah, indeed. And members of our network, they worked on following where the actual money ends up from recovery funds. And we really see that it again goes to the huge corporations that anyway make a lot of profit. While member states indeed rather ignore the need to mobilize much more finance, there is currently a discussion to increase the EIB's lending capacity. Not by much, but substantially. What do you think is the current potential of the EIB in general? Like, while we don't have these bigger investments possible, what could the EIB do to try to steer Europe on the correct path?
The EIB has developed over the decades a capacity to do that which is necessary in terms of investment in Europe. I have a very high regard for the EIB, which is one of the few institutions of the European Union that should not hang their heads in shame. Having said that, there is nothing the EIB can do on its own without the green light from the European Union Council and from the European Parliament to become macroeconomically significant. And the only way the EIB can become macroeconomically significant is if there is a tie-up with the ECB. We don't have a common treasury. We don't have a federal European treasury. If we did, that would have been another matter. But the reason why I have been, since 2002, advocating a link-up between the EIB and the ECB is because it is a clear and present path for Europe to develop its own macroeconomically significant investment path. And let me be precise here. If we're going to have a 5% of GDP that is poured into investment, with the EIB playing a central role in that, the EIB needs to have the backing of the ECB. And to be more precise, suppose there was an announcement tomorrow morning that, a press conference, President of the EU Council, the ECB and the EIB, and they were to say that as of tomorrow morning, the EIB is going to provide the bond markets with 600 billion of a net issuance of EIB bonds, which are already, AAA rated. And because that would manifest a very large increase in bond issuance by the EIB, to steady the market's nerves, the ECB declares that if needs be, it stands ready in the secondary markets to buy them. That announcement on its own would mean that they would sell like hotcakes, and the yields of the EIB bonds would be below the yields of the German bonds. And immediately would have 600 billion to spend on the green transition every year. So that's the point I'm making. For this, you need political will to do it. You need the European Union Council to authorize it. And the beauty of this is, and this is why I'm so unhappy that this proposal has not been taken up in the last 20 years when some of us have been putting forward that particular proposal. The beauty of it is that it is completely within the rules of the European Union and of Maastricht even. Because the EIB bonds, unlike the German bonds, unlike Italian bonds, Greek bonds and so on, they're not state bonds. They belong to all Europeans. The EIB is common. You're not buying the bonds of a state. You're buying the bonds of Europe. The EIB bonds are a genuine Eurobond. And it's simply a matter of political will to declare that this is what they are and this is how we're going to use them. And the ECB is going to buy them, if needs be. And if they were just to say that, they wouldn't even need to buy them. And then the EIB would be, it would set off. It would do its job well. But it's not allowed to. This is a tragedy. We have this one mechanism, we have this one tool, and we're not using it. And if we didn't use it in 2011, 12, 13, 14, 15, the height of the euro crisis, and if we didn't use it during the pandemic, that's because of the lack of political will. And today, in 2025, there is not a smidgen of an iota of a hint of political will, simply because we don't have governments anymore. France has no government. Germany has no government, and even when they get one, it will be a government that is navel-gazing and doesn't care about Europe at all because it has given up on Europe. The Netherlands and Austria have right-wing governments that, if anything, they're Eurosceptic and they don't give a damn about what Europe and its investment programs are. So this is why I'm saying we've missed the opportunity.
That's a very sobering account to hear for sure. At the same time, looking more at concrete EIB projects that the bank is currently financing and push to finance, we also see a huge focus on artificial intelligence, digitalization, the high tech really presented as the only game in town now for Europe's economy, in terms of this competitiveness agenda. In your last book, you talk about the dangers of techno-feudalism and evolution to that from capitalism. Can you explain a bit this concept to us, and basically how should we then orient the finance towards digitalization or AI in a better way?
Well, my concept of techno-feudalism is based on the hypothesis, the controversial hypothesis that we're beyond capitalism now. We are already in a post-capitalist era. We have something, and I say this as a left-winger, that is worse than capitalism, which I call techno-feudalism. And what's techno-feudalism? There is a new mutation of capital. Capital has always been one thing since time immemorial. There have been lots of technological progress. So a fishing rod, an ancient form of capital, which is a produced means of production, is as much a produced means of production as an industrial robot assembling Tesla cars. But that's what they are, whether it's a fishing rod, a plow, a steam engine, or a diesel engine, or an industrial robot. They are produced means of production. But what lives inside our phones and the laptops and optic fiber cables and cell towers and software and algorithms and all that, that's a completely different form of capital, a mutation, we call it. I call it cloud capital because it is a produced means, it's an automated piece of machinery, but its job is not to produce anything except to modify our behavior. So we train it to train us, to train it to know us, to give us good suggestions, therefore to grab our attention and win our trust, and then sell us stuff outside markets, because Amazon.com is not a market. It's a platform, a trading platform, but it's not a market. It's got no degree of decentralization whatsoever, no degree of competition whatsoever. You can't talk, if you and I are on Amazon, we can't talk to one another, we can't talk to any sellers unless the algorithm belonging to one man, Jeff Bezos, puts us in contact in the interest of Jeff Bezos, who charges a rent. Up to 40% of the price you pay for anything in Amazon goes into his pockets. And he has produced nothing. So that's a form, what I say is, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to techno-feudalism. This is not capitalism. But when I hear Europeans say, oh, what are we going to do? How are we going to find money now to create our own version of cloud capital? The answer is you can't. You really cannot. You've missed that boat, you fools. Because for so many years, you have effectively surrendered to Silicon Valley. Once Google, Uber, Airbnb, Facebook, Meta, Amazon, and so on corner the market, if you and I were to suddenly have divine intuition and come up with the best algorithms and the best pieces of AI and so on, it would be irrelevant. Because let's face it, I mean, suppose we had a fantastic piece of software that is better than Twitter, that is better than Facebook, that is better than Airbnb. Who cares? There's nothing we can do with this. This can never be competitive because we all know, for instance, that ever since Elon Musk, even before that, but especially after Elon Musk bought Twitter and turned it into X, you had the process of what my good friend Cory Doctorow defines as enshittification. The whole place, the whole digital square, as you call it, became imbued and flooded by sewage. So, there's Blue Sky, which is much cleaner and better and less algorithmically driven. But, I'm on Blue Sky too. But I can't get out of Twitter because, when you have millions of people who follow you on Twitter, you're stuck there. So it's not a question of spending money now in order to build up European cloud capital. European cloud capital would never do it. How did the Chinese do it? Because the Chinese are the only country, the only economic bloc that managed to create its own cloud capital and its own AI. Well, they did it through two routes. Firstly, they have an investment program, unlike Europe. Here I'm harking back to the earlier discussion. And the other thing is they banned Silicon Valley. So, you had Baidu developing instead of Google. You had Bilibili developing instead of Twitter. You had Alibaba developing instead of Amazon. But in Europe, our politicians would never imagine of saying to the Americans, you know what? Amazon cannot operate in Europe. We have to create our own. And we're going to build it along different lines that reflect our values, whatever our European values might be. But unless you're prepared to do that, you've given up before you've even started. So it's not a question of pouring money into it. You can take Volt, for instance, WOLT, the food delivery service, which is German. It's already been purchased by the Americans. So whatever we develop, we're going to lose it because so much concentrated power has gone to the cloud capital owners in the United States and in China that Europe, through regulation, this is the tragic illusion and delusion of Europeans. They think that by regulating, they can be a power. It used to be the case when it comes to cars and so on that Europe had a lot of power to regulate other people's businesses because we're a large economy. When it comes to cloud capital, there's zero possibility of that. In the end, whenever there's a tussle between the European Commission and Silicon Valley, the European Commission is going to lose. Look at Thierry Breton, he lost his job because he went against them. Vestager, they will simply roll over. Therefore, the question becomes this: are we prepared to play hardball and effectively to erect a firewall and build our own ecosystem within Europe? That is the question. And I think the answer is demonstrably a big fat no, which leads to the conclusion that however much the money they spend on cloud capital and AI and so on, it will be America and China that will dominate the space.
So you wouldn't say that the EIB has no point in investing in this type of projects anymore?
Well, it depends. Look, there are two kinds of cloud capital use or AI use. If you look at, for instance, DeepSeek, the Chinese startup that took $1 trillion out of the big tech industry in the United States simply by providing a chat GPT competitor for free. That kind of marketplace is one in which the EIB could invest because it's a traditional capitalist segment. OpenAI and DeepSeek offer you a service that they charge for, or in the case of DeepSeek, they decide to give it for free. But it's like buying a pizza. If a pizza place gives you pizzas away for free, then the pizza next door that charges you is going to have a problem. But that's a marketplace. It's a capitalist marketplace. But the real power of cloud capital doesn't come from a capitalist marketplace. It comes from the techno-feudal space, what I call techno-feudal space. So, when you are on Facebook and you want to use Facebook in order to propagate your political party, your company, your clothes, your fashion line, whatever it is that you're selling or trying to make successful using Facebook or Instagram or whatever, or TikTok for that matter, okay, then you are caught in that cloud thieves. And it's not a question, there's no competition there. Okay. Maybe there's rivalry between different cloud fiefdoms, but there's no market competition. When it comes to that, there's nothing the EIB can do through investment in order to create a European version of it. When it comes to competing with OpenAI, there is a possibility, but DeepSeek has already done that. It offers a very good AI service to you for free. What is Europe going to do?
I'd like to turn now to another topic that the EIB is increasingly looking to invest into. The European Union is making the EIB really the bank to finance the military industry, defense sector. This is something we are really concerned about, of course. The bank already doubled its defense spending for this year. It's changed its internal rules to finance now increasingly projects of dual use for the military sector that are no longer just predominantly of civilian nature. This means that the bank can effectively finance projects like drones, border protection, military mobility, etc. And this is, of course, still not enough for the Commission. There is an increasing push now to make the EIB fund purely military projects on top of the proposals from the Commission, like the common defense bonds, which you surely like a lot. And we see this as a big problem, that the only push against this is the concerns for the EIB's AAA credit rating, not the fact that it's a public bank that should support public policy goals, or the fact that it ends up supporting companies like Leonardo, which provide weapons to Israel. In your view, what's the risk of rolling out public funds to the military sector as part of this Europe's competitiveness agenda?
If it weren't a crime against humanity to spend money we don't have on weapons that we don't need, it would be a crime against logic, and it is a crime against logic. The European Investment Bank should never, ever be allowed to invest in the armaments industry. Not only because we don't need more weaponry in this world of ours, we have enough. It's other stuff we don't have enough of. But primarily because it makes no financial sense. When you build a fast train linking, let's say, Berlin to Belgrade in the eastern part of Europe, which has no proper transport infrastructure, that train is going to produce revenues, and you'll be able to repay the EIB. But when you're producing ammunition, how are you going to repay the EIB? From state funds? We already know there's no fiscal space in Germany, in France, and so on, in order to build whatever it is, stocks of ammunition. So the EIB financially is essentially violating its own principles of fiduciary obligations to the owners of the EIB, which is the peoples of Europe. The preposterous suggestion that, okay, we had the Green Deal, we forgot about that, and now we have the war union, Europe as a war union, and growth will come from spending on defense or offense or whatever, on weaponry. There is only one in human history example of a successful business model along those lines, and that's the United States military-industrial complex. They have been running their investment program, their research program, including the internet, DARPA, and so on military spending. But that's why the United States, since 1945, has to have a war every year or two in order to clear the stocks of ammunition that they built. We had the Korea War, we had the Vietnam War, we had all sorts of wars, Afghanistan, Iraq, Ukraine, and so on. All these wars are motivated by the need of the military-industrial complex in the United States to keep, turning over, I should say, their stocks of ammunitions and munitions and aeroplanes and tanks. Is that what Europe wants? Do we want to create a business model whereby the EIB is investing monies that will only be recouped if we become the exporters of mass death? Is that what happened to Europe? Because I'm old enough to remember a Europe that was pretending to be a peace project, a project for peace. Now we are becoming a warmongers union, and we haven't even thought through what this means for the credit rating of the EIB, what it means for the credit rating of our soul. It is just stating those very simple facts is enough to make one lose the will to live.
And this is clearly very much divorced from the overall will of the public of Europe, right? So what institutional reforms would we need or public mobilization to actually democratize Europe's governance and financial institutions like the EIB?
My terrible concern is that the only way an inane establishment can elicit consent from the people, from voters, consent to their mad plans for growth through defense spending. The only way they can elicit that consent is by terrorizing people. And we can see that. Our media are replete, they're absolutely full of reports of Chinese spies and the Russians who are going to invade Norway, and North Korean tanks rolling over in Champs-Élysées in Paris. I mean, there is this motivated madness. Terrorize people so as to accept as inevitable the need to shift resources from the green transition, from the social welfare net to arms. What can we do to stop this? Well, good old democratic politics in every way, shape, or form. We need to keep demonstrating. We need to overthrow politicians in elections who are dragging us down that road to perdition.
And in your view, looking specifically now at the European Investment Bank, knowing that it has the board of governors, board of directors, like, do you see a possibility to transforming this institution into like a really truly democratic public bank by tweaking the way it's governed? For instance, the KfW, the German bank, also includes unions on its board and has a little bit better model for the governance. Do you see like a positive prospect for that for the EIB?
Well, the board of governors of the EIB are the finance ministers. I was one for a few months. So it's a Eurogroup effect. The Eurogroup are the board of managers of the EIB. It is ridiculous to think of it that way, right? So whatever ridiculous decisions that ECOFIN or the Eurogroup take, then they are replicated half an hour later, and this is exactly precisely right. What I'm describing, because when finance ministers get together, they have a meeting for a few hours as a Eurogroup. Then the next day before they fly off, they have one meeting for half an hour as ECOFIN, because this is simply rubber stamping what the Eurogroup says. And then they have another meeting for another half hour as the board of governors of the EIB. So the EIB effectively doesn't have a board of governors. So the democratization of an institution like the EIB is absolutely essential. I mean, I would go as far as to say, to cut a long story short and cut through a lot of discussions about who should be on it, create a citizens' assembly, like a jury system. Select randomly Europeans from certain groups of experts and people in the know who will be sitting on the board and will be rotating every 6 months. Now, that would be a good change. But again, the EIB is not going to become a force for serious good until and unless we have the political will at the European Council meeting to give the green light to the EIB to do that which is necessary for Europe, instead of being either macroeconomically significant or being pushed by the half-crazy Ursula von der Leyen and the fully crazy Kaja Kallas, former Prime Minister of Estonia, who a few weeks before she became our chief of foreign affairs in the European Union, was advocating the breakup of Russia. I mean, we have crazy people like that running the show. As long as this is the case, what do you expect of the poor EIB?
To conclude, maybe if you were to give one recommendation in the meantime to the EIB's president, Nadia Calvino, where to direct right now EIB's capital, pending all these bigger reforms that are so much needed, where would it be?
I would suggest to Nadia Calvino, who's a very decent person, that she should invest 90% of her time campaigning for the EIB to become macroeconomically significant, and for a link up between the EIB and the ECB, so that the ECB's purchasing power, QE power, can be the lever by which the EIB becomes macroeconomically significant for the purposes of massive green investments across Europe.
Okay, so that's a great note to conclude on. Maybe it's not so late yet for Europe, and collectively we can combine all our efforts to make a better future for the people of Europe and the world. Thank you very much for recording the podcast with us.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. I am Joanna from CEO, Corporate Europe Observatory, and together with Counterbalance, we produced this podcast. We hope you enjoyed it. Please do not forget to check out Counterbalance's website and follow them on social media so that you do not miss a single bit of their work. Till next time, bye-bye.